Next up, I want to go ahead and welcome Mr. Brian Washburn from My TRA Consulting. I don't know about you guys, succession planning sounds daunting. Brian makes it sound fun. We are in for a treat. Welcome, Brian.
All right. Well, succession planning is probably not the reason that most of you come to this conference, and most of the symposiums that I've been to always have a management component to it. Succession planning is something that I had spent a lot of time with for a very good reason. And as Ben alluded to, change is inevitable, and we're seeing that within our industries. A lot of that going on. Let me kind of backfill. I want to share my story with you as to why succession planning was always very important to me. We'll get started here with the presentation. What is succession planning? Well, in an academic definition, it's a systematic approach to identifying key positions within an organization, and most importantly, developing a pipeline of talent who can fill those positions going forward. As I told you, I spent a lot of time doing succession planning, and the reason that it was so important to me, you need to understand where I come from. See, I'm a guy who fell 2 months short of making it 40 years in electric co-op. Not the same co-op. I actually moved around a little bit. I started October the 18th, 1981 as an apprentice lineman. Worked my way through the ranks, become a lineman, become a crew leader, become a foreman, set in for my operations manager part-time. When I got the opportunity to move to northern Indiana and actually become an operations manager. Well, the next 14 years I spent as an operations manager, but I always knew I wanted to be a CEO. As fate would have it, I got the opportunity to manage a co-op down in southern Illinois, moved into the position. I knew it was a troubled co-op when I took it over, but I didn't realize how deeply troubled they were. They had rate problems, they had operational problems. 1 month into my time down there, we had what I thought was the worst day in my life. We had a public contact that resulted in a fatality. So not only did I have a troubled co-op, now I had a troubled co-op that was probably going to get sued. My wife of 27 years decided on a weekend to come down, and we were going to tour around the towns. We were going to try to figure out where we were going to live. We had plans of putting roots down in southern Illinois. We got out that morning on the motorcycle, and we were going to go visit some communities. And we spent a lovely day driving around till about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then my whole life changed. We had a motorcycle accident. That day became kind of a blur to me. I remember waking up in Jerseyville Hospital with a group of people around me. They were taking x-rays, they were doing everything. The next recollection that I have, I can remember being loaded in a helicopter. And I was flown to St. Louis University Hospital, where the rest of the day is kind of lost for me. I don't remember a whole lot about it. The next morning, I woke up with my 2 sons at my bedside, and I said, "What has happened?" And my oldest son said, "Well, Dad, I need to share with you. You were in a pretty serious motorcycle accident yesterday. You've got 11 broken ribs. You've got a broken left clavicle. The left side of your face needs reconstructed. And by the way, you've got a cracked vertebrae." And I said, "What about your mother?" And he said, "Well, Dad, Mom's gone." What a blow. Brand new CEO. I've taken over a troubled co-op, and now I'm by myself. The very next person that entered the room about 10 minutes later was my board president. And I remember Bob walking in. Bob shook my hand and he said, "Pat and I extend our condolences." But almost in the very next breath, or very same breath, Bob says, "Brian, you've made me aware of a lot of the problems that we've got. What are we going to do?" And I remember thinking, how could a guy even bring that up? I had a lot going on. But then I had to put on my CEO's hat. And I thought about it for a second. And before I responded, which, by the way, is a little bit unusual for me, because usually I speak before I think, I said, "Well, as fate would have it, Bob, 3 days ago, understanding all the problems that we've got, I met with a longtime, recently retired CEO of our neighboring co-op. And I said, what you need to do is you need to call him and see if he can come in." Obviously, I was going to have to go back to Indiana and rehab. I wasn't going to be worth a hoot for a while. So Bob left the hospital room that day, made that contact. Unwittingly, I had put together a succession plan. Well, to jump ahead in the story a little bit, I stayed at that co-op for about a year. As you can imagine, the troubles were pretty deep, and I knew that wasn't a long-time thing for me. So if you believe in destiny, I got a call from a headhunter who wanted me to come back to Indiana. I come and I interviewed, and anyway, I ended up at Jasper County REMC, and that's where I spent the last 15 years of my life, or my career. But as I went into Jasper County REMC, I decided that I probably needed to have a comprehensive succession plan. And as I started researching succession plans, one of the things that come to me was I needed to compile a list of information. So the very first piece of information that I got was an employee contact list. Now, you'll notice the little red folder, and today I have a little red folder up here. We have bought a box full of little red folders for you guys to take back to your respective organizations. And my goal today is that you will grab one of our little red folders, you'll take it back, and there's a couple of things that I need you to understand about succession planning. Succession planning is not going to be done in a week. It took me 9 months to put my little red folder together. I'm going to go into what I put into my little red folder. But what I did with this little red folder, there's some pretty sensitive information that you need to put together here. And this talk is for everybody here. I know some of you are CEOs, some of you are not CEOs, but I'm going to suggest to you that even if you're not a CEO, putting together a little red folder is going to be very important to you. So you ask, what did I put in my little red folder? Well, one of the very first things that I talked about is I put together an employee listing. And one of the things that I noticed, we had an employee listing, but it wasn't very comprehensive. It didn't have email addresses. It may have had the home phone number, but it didn't have cell phone numbers. It didn't have contact information for significant others. So we put together a very, very comprehensive employee contact list. The next thing that we put together was a call schedule. You guys are telephone companies. I assume you probably have people who are on call. And remember, as I put this thing together, I'm relating it back to my story. I had a board president that had to take over for a day or two until we got somebody who was more experienced in. And that person that was more experienced, they didn't know our people. So I found it very important that we put together a call schedule within the little red folder. The last thing that I put in, as it relates to employees, was an organizational chart. Once again, it may be somebody coming in that doesn't know anything about your organization. The organizational chart, I think, is so important for you to put in. We talk about this taking several months to put together. One of the things that I had to do was I had to put together a policy on succession plan. And my policy on the succession plan, it named the board president as the person who would initially take over. Now that person may or may not take over in my absence, but a couple of days, or they may be there for several months. If they are there for several months, one of the things that I needed to think about was a list of resolutions. You know, one of the things that you don't think about in that case is who's going to sign the employees' paychecks. Let your employees go without being paid for a little while. You'll have a mutiny. Actually, I had, I think it was up to 11 resolutions that needed to be adopted by the board so that we could have signators for our checks. The last thing, and here's where my policy on succession planning was very extensive, it was how to communicate what was happening. I remember one of the things that we put in our policy was within a 48-hour period, the board president was supposed to bring together all the employees and do nothing more than to let them know that we'd already thought this process through. We have a plan, we have a policy, and it's going to be all right. One of the things that really surprised me down in Southern Illinois, I was an unknown commodity, but you wouldn't believe how many newspapers that my accident hit. And now the most efficient mill that there is the rumor mill. So if you can shut that rumor mill down, how to communicate what is going to happen was very, very important to me. The next thing that I put in there was a staff evaluation. Those of you who have a cooperative background know that boards can sometimes take the easy way out. And I wanted my board president to have an evaluation on each and every member of my staff. I wanted him to know, him or her, who potential successors were. Equally as important was to have a list of those that may be interested and those that were not interested. Now, as the CEO of Jasper County RMC, I had the easiest job in the world because I had nobody that wanted my job. So I had a lot of job security. But I thought it was important that my board president know who was and who wasn't interested. Detailed recommendation of my successor. Once again, being with a cooperative, most of these boards have never hired anyone outside of their CEO. I wanted them to know what kind of traits they should look for in the successor. I think that is so very key. You know, each and every one of our jobs have different traits that are required of them. I would have never taken my marketing person and tried to make them an operations manager. They talk totally different languages. So putting a detailed recommendation on traits that my successor should have, I found to be very, very important. A recommendation on who could fill in short term. I remember I done a tour over in Europe one time, a renewables tour with the United Nations. And I named my operations manager as the guy who could fill in for a week. I would have never named my operations manager to fill in full time. long term. Great at what he did, he would have never made a good CEO. And the last thing that I put in there was a job description on everybody that worked at the co-op. And one of the things that I think, if you think about this succession plan, I think one of the ancillary effects can be you're going to get your job descriptions up to date. I don't know about you, I visited job descriptions every single year, because what I found out is the job descriptions that we had from even as little as 5 years ago didn't look anything like the job descriptions today. We live in a very, very fast-paced world, and all of our people are being asked to do more with less. And if you don't have that detailed job description, how can you ever fill that job? The next thing that I put together was financial data. And when I talk about financial data, I'm talking about bank accounts, bank account numbers. Not so much how much money we had in each bank account, but where it was, who it was with, and equally important is contacts. You know, there's going to be a lot of calling in those first few days. These people are going to need to know who they need to deal with at, for instance, DeMott State Bank versus CoBank. And the contact information related to all those financial accounts. I also put in there government agencies. You know, as a CEO, and here again, even as a department head, there's a lot of people that you talk to on a weekly basis. I wanted this person to have Sheriff's Department information. I wanted them to know who our county commissioners were and contact information for those. Our state representatives. As a CEO, you know as well as I do, we do a lot with our state representatives. The last thing that I put in my little red folder was resources. Now, when I talk about resources, one of the things that I put in there, and I remember this from a few years back, I put a list of potential search firms and employment agencies in there. That is going to be so key to whoever was filling in for you. I wanted them to know who could provide interim services, along with who could do a national search. I put together the statewide association, our power supplier, contact information, and our suppliers. Most of us deal with suppliers on a very regular basis. And I wanted this person to have that information and know who to contact and how to get a hold of them. I've talked about this a little bit before. Individual team members need this red folder as well. I'm not here just to talk to the CEOs. CEOs, you may have a lot more information that needs to be gathered. But as a department head, or any one of you that are sitting in this symposium today, I assume that you are key to your organization. If you weren't key to your organization, you probably wouldn't be here. You need to list out your duties and responsibilities. As a CEO, I can tell you, I didn't know all the duties that my department heads were responsible for. One of the things I used to do is I required monthly staff meetings, and it used to just tickle me because I would hear the same old thing. Oh, I don't have time for this. Then we would get into a staff meeting, and before long, one staff member would talk about a project they were working on, and the other staff member would look over and say, well, I didn't know you were working on that. Now, we were a very small organization, but we still had silos. Duties and responsibility, a list of your duties and responsibilities and projects. I think, is something that should be updated maybe once a year. You don't need to do this on a daily basis. But I think it's important that if you think about, if I couldn't be here tomorrow, who's going to fill in? It includes due dates, if required. Many of us have due dates that may be out a year or two. Contacts, names, and phone numbers for both inside and outside the organization. I doubt that your boss knows everybody that you contact on a weekly basis. That information would be important. And here is something that, if you put together, I'm going to guarantee you some of your people back home are going to have problems with. Your IT people are going to say, oh, never write down your passwords. But those could be very, very important going forward. Instructions on accessing systems or databases. We all access our systems and databases on a daily basis. If you weren't there tomorrow, how would people get into your stuff? And then policies and procedures. Some of the advantages to putting together a very comprehensive succession plan: it ensures continuity. You know, I've done a little bit of talks throughout the country, and one of the things that I always open with is, I'd like to see a show of hands. How many of you wake up in the morning and say, I get to go to work so I can mess things up? I've yet to have anybody raise their hand. You know, I think we all want to provide in our jobs that continuity going forward. It mitigates risks. If you weren't there tomorrow, would there be a certain amount of risk to the association? I believe there would be. I don't care what role that you have within your organization. I think one of the advantages is that it does mitigate risk and it enhances organizational performance. Most of us, most of you, like me, are looking forward to that date that we retire. Believe it or not, I'm all the way over from Northwest Indiana, and I'm a retired guy. But I think enhancing the organizational performance is what we all want to do. The disadvantages of not having a comprehensive succession plan: there's a lot of loss of institutional knowledge. There's also decreased morale. If you don't think that you're not important to your organization, step out for a while. You will find out how morale can go down so quickly. And decreased organizational agility. I think that pretty well speaks for itself. The academic approach, my story is a little bit unique. And my prayer for you guys is that none of you ever have to live through what I lived through. It's hard. But there is an academic approach, and I'm going to run through the 10 steps, and I put these in only so that you guys will have them. I think the presentation is going to be available after today on the website. And these are nothing more than to give you the opportunity to maybe spur you on to do this. It is to identify leadership and executive positions. Step 2 is to develop those job descriptions. Like I said, I doubt that your organization is much different than mine was. And I was surprised when I got to Jasper County REMC how outdated our job descriptions were. And personally, I reviewed job descriptions every single year because I required performance evaluations. And it was the one time during the year that it was me and that employee, the phone was off, the door was closed, and we had a conversation. And this was one thing that we always did. And it will surprise you at how outdated some of your job descriptions are. It makes you assess some of the current talent. Each one of you, especially CEOs, you've got some very talented people within your organization. It's going to make you think a little bit about the current talent that you have. Identifying potential successors, and now most importantly, is to create a development plan. How many of you spend a whole lot of time creating development plans? How many of you have even thought within the last 12 months about your succession plan? And you have. Well, John, God bless you, because of course, you're at that age, like myself, where we've got a little bit of gray hair. We're starting to think about the days after the company. I think I've seen 3 hands go up, and there's probably, 70 people in here? This succession planning is so very important. It'll help you to develop your employees. You know, stepping into a leadership role is not as easy as what you may think. Back in the early or late 1990s, I actually taught a class that was so well received, and it just blew me away. And it was called Bud the Boss. Being somebody's buddy one day and being their boss the next is something that's very hard. And I'm going to tell you, your organizations need to start thinking about developing your employees. You need to evaluate their progress. As I shared with you, I always required yearly evaluations. And that evaluation was nothing more than an evaluation of their progress. Continued communications. It's going to make you talk to your people and talk about the future. The last 2 things is to review and update the plan. I will tell you that I only visited my plan about once a year after I put it together. There was really no need to. There were very few changes that needed to be made. And the last thing is to monitor implementation. I know my story is very unique, and oftentimes when we think about succession plan, we're thinking about a normal retirement. I want everybody that leaves here today to take one of these little red folders and take them back. Take it back and lay it on your desk. It doesn't have to be put away in a file folder. This is not, what do they call it? This is not like our strategic plan where we go, all right, we've worked on this for 3 weeks, I'm done. And we put it up on a shelf to collect dust. This is an ongoing process. It will take you many months to prepare for this. But change is inevitable. Ben alluded to that when he was talking. Change is coming. And you need to be investing a little bit of time in this. You need to think about what legacy do you want to leave behind with the company. Most of you are probably longtime employees, and it's because your company is a good company. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? And it will also, for those CEOs in particular, it will make you think about what is the culture of your company. Does your company necessarily need to be changed, or is the culture just fine? Just like electric co-ops, our cultures are pretty darn good. You know, I remember I retired a lady at Jasper County REMC, and she was a little unusual, but she had 53 years with the company. Wow. She didn't stay 53 years because we were a bad organization or we were a bad company. The last point that I want to leave with you is this right here, and I can't tell you who it's a quote by, but the successful transaction is the last act of a great leader. And I believe that so very much. With that, that kind of closes out my presentation. I wanted to leave a few minutes here at the end of it. Do any of you have any questions of me? My story is a little unique, but succession planning, I think, is something that oftentimes goes overlooked, but I think it is so, so very important. And you folks need to spend just a little bit of time with succession planning. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So when it comes to a succession plan, it would seem to me, depending on the level and depending on the sensitivity of the information, it's a secret document, or...
I thank you for bringing that up, John Ivanowski.
You know where I'm going, Brian. Yeah.
I do. I've shared with you what I put in my little red folder, and some of it is sensitive. You have bank account information in there, but more importantly to me was I had staff evaluations in there, and that was things that I didn't want other members of my staff to have access to. So what I did with my little red folder, after I got it put together, I shipped it to my attorney, who was off-site, and I said, I had detailed instructions on what to do in the event that I would be incapacitated. And the instructions included, they were to either drive that to the co-op the next day or overnight it to the board president's house. I never wanted that document seen by anybody other than myself or my attorney. So thank you, and I forgot to cover that. Any other questions?
I have one, actually. How do you keep it from becoming a conversation of replaceability, where you keep the job security intact for the rest of the employees?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Absolutely. How do you keep it from becoming a job insecurity issue? Because you're detailing plans on how to replace you. How do you do that in a fashion of, if someone is underperforming potentially, how do you keep that from being a part of the conversation?
I don't think that you ever keep that from being part of the conversation, but that should be a part of the yearly evaluation. Believe you me, I had, as part of my yearly evaluations, I had some pretty tough conversations with some of my staff. Some of them that didn't end up, be it either they didn't get the pay raise that they expected, and here are the reasons why. As a CEO, I always found it important that I was setting the tone. But more importantly, setting expectations, I think, is a key component. And those are tough conversations to have, believe you me. And I've had to have a few of them. So I hope that answers your question. Good question. Any other questions? Not hearing any, Shiloh? I guess I'm done. Thank you.